Alright, so as you can see by the title here, I'll be talking about how to blend with soft core pencils. Now the first thing I really have to stress is that for my particular style of coloring, I'm not saying this is necessarily the way you have to color, but for the tips and tricks that I use for my coloring, it is important to always color from dark to light. Always in my style of coloring, you need to color from dark to light for it to look like mine, and have that same effect. So I have here steps 1, 2, 3, and this is pretty much universal for whenever I color. It's really this simple. I start with the darkest color that I have, or the one that I want to be the darkest color necessarily. Like pink may not really be as darker than this other sort of color, but it's the darkest color that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and put that first. So basically what I do is it's just kind of messy, as I just sort of like layer on the color, and this is going to be really hard pressure towards the top, and I've already kind of explained this in some of my other videos, but you want to use really hard pressure towards the top and then gradually lessen pressure as you get down and sort of just make it fade away a little bit, because you don't want to use really hard pressure for the entire thing, because then you won't be blending when you're layering colors over it. Like I said, gradually lessen the pressure. Now for step number 2, we already have our pink, so we're going to be layering our second color, which is going to be this sort of dark peach. And over this area right here that we've left sort of grainy and light pressure, we're to come over that with really heavy pressure. Really, like, it's as strong pressure you can possibly get. And we're going to go over that area and then blend it down and do the exact same thing. And you can see, because we've left this area right here sort of lighter pressure, that when you layer the color over it, it'll blend together. It will merge together. This is really blending, because you're it's like kind of smushing those two colors together in a sense, and it will blend it. And then for step number 3 is basically, like I said, just rinse and repeat. You're basically doing the exact same thing as you did in step number 2, only with your lightest color, and then just sort of blending it out until it kind of fades away to nothing. And that's basically how I color pretty much everything. Always start with your darkest color, and then move on to your mid-tone, and then get to your lightest color. And you want to use, people ask me how many colors should I use. You definitely, and for my style, you want to use at least 3 colors, because it will really give you a good amount of depth. For this particular combination, this is the colors that I use for skin most often. This is sort of a blushy area, and then I get into the kind of like darker skin color and then the lightest skin color. So hopefully that makes sense. Always color from dark to light. I can't stress it enough, always. So yes, I'm going to show you, actually, next I'm going to show you why that's important, and how it will look differently if you do color from light to dark. Alright, now I know that I say that coloring, from dark to light is the way to go, but of course it wouldn't really mean anything unless I actually showed you why. Now see, here I have these 2 rows, and on this top row I'm coloring from light to dark. Now basically what I'm doing is kind of how I see coloring done with markers a lot, is where people will use their lightest color first and lay that down, and then gradually build up darker colors. Now, I mean, this can work for certain medias, but for Prismacolor colored pencils specifically, the soft core pencils, what I'm talking about first, it doesn't necessarily work so well. Because I've colored this entire layer, I've gotten rid of a lot of that sort of tooth in the paper, and when I try to stick more color on top of it, I'm basically just layering it. There's really not much blending that's going on. It won't really blend properly, and you can see the colors are being kind of washed out, because again I have that really light color on top of it. Now with softcore pencils and colored pencils in general, if you try to put a darker color on top of a lighter color, it's not really going to work too well. It's not as intense as you would like it. It kind of appears somewhat light and muddy. So if you want your colors to be really vibrant and really strong, you definitely do need to color from dark to light. And here you can see that I've done the same sort of skin tone thing that I did in the last tip. And I'm starting with my darkest color. Now, if you've ever seen me color in my videos, you'll know that when I first start out, my coloring can look kind of gross because I'm sort of like laying down this dark area of color, and it kind of looks kind of silly at first. And then it gradually builds up. Like I've showed you in my last example, you build up this color with this hard pressure right here, and then gradually lessen it, and then using your last color. The exact opposite of what you would do from light to dark. And you can see how much more intense these colors are. They're so much more intense because you're not layering this lighter color on top of this darker color and getting rid of the darkness. Like I said, darker colors just do not really layer very well over lighter colors. It just takes out the darkness, and it won't really stick as well to other colors as it will on the paper. That's the really most important thing I have to say, is that if you're trying to put a color on top of another color, it's not going to be as dark as if you were to put it straight on the paper. So if that's the only thing you can take away from that, then good, because that's what you have to remember, is that it will never be as strong as it will be on the plain white paper. No matter what color, dark color you use, if you put black on top of white, you're going to get gray. It's not going to be black on top of white, unfortunately. So down here, I'm going to be moving on to the Verithin and doing the exact same thing as I did with the softcore pencils, trying to color from light to dark and then from dark to light. Now, if I hadn't mentioned this before, these are the exact same colors, only done in the opposite method, of course, the opposite the opposite sequence here. Of course, here I'm starting with the lightest color, which is this yellow, and then I'm layering on this mid-tone, which is orange, and then trying to do this red, which is the darkest. Of course, red is my darkest color, so when I color from dark to light, I'll start with red first, and then the orange, and then the yellow. And especially with the Verithin pencils, I noticed that you can see a lot of graininess, because it's not really being blended, like I said, it's just sort of being layered on top. So because these pencils are so hard and thin, it's kind of hard to sort of make this sort of color magically blend in if you're not actually blending it, if that makes sense. But here you can see on the bottom that there's, again, the color is a lot stronger. It's a lot more of a gradient here, and it just looks a lot better, so in my opinion. Of course, like I said, you're free to color from light to dark if you want to, but for my particular style, like I said, this is just tips and tricks that I've learned. You'll definitely want to try coloring from dark to light. And like I said, I know it can look weird when you start out like this. Coloring dark areas first on top of white, it does look really odd to begin with. But once you start layering your lighter tones, you'll see that it looks really pretty, at least in my opinion. So definitely give that a try if you haven't. Like my little shoe over here says, "Why you no color? Dark to light." Alright, so here's another little tip that I want to tell you about, and this is blending with the white softcore pencil. And it has to be the softcore pencil because, it has that soft lead that will really do all this cool stuff. Now, these are just some things that I've found that you can do with white pencil. It's actually one of my favorite things to do, is to go ahead and use this white softcore pencil because it can do some really cool things, as you can see here. The first thing that you can see is I've taken this regular, plain, really hard pressure box. And what I've done is I've used this white pencil to make these little lines in here and to give it texture. What the white pencil will kind of do is it will kind of lighten that color that you put on. Now, it's really hard to make darker colors sit on top of lighter colors, but it's really a lot easier to make lighter colors sit on top of dark colors. For some reason, with colored pencils, it's a lot easier to take away darkness than it is to add to it. So you can pretty much just use this white pencil to sort of make these really cool texture marks. And you don't have to do it in this sort of like lined pattern. You can do little zigzags or whatever. But it's really cool to use, and I definitely recommend trying that. Another thing you can do is if you don't have a lot of colors, which is a big problem for my particular style, if you don't have a lot of colors to work with, which is perfectly fine, you can use white as a substitute to blend colors together. Now, usually what I would do is I would start with this really dark blue here. I would add another blue, and then probably even a lighter blue to that. Now, if you can't actually do that because you don't have that many shades of blue, what you can do is just use this one dark blue, kind of make this sort of little, hard pressure here, and then gradually lessen it, like really lessen it to where you're barely touching the paper, really like gradually lessen that. and then put your white on top of it and really hard pressure all the way through it, except for at this very, very top part where you want it to be really dark. And you can see that it kind of makes it look sort of like paint, like I've just sort of smeared this little line of paint here, and that can look really awesome too. Another thing that you can do with white that I've noticed is you can actually pull the color. Now I have these three little sticks, these three little lines of color, and all I've done here is I've sort of pulled these across like this, back and forth. And what you can see that it kind of does is it makes sort of a reflection. If you're coloring water or something like this, I definitely recommend trying this. Basically, just draw whatever it is you're drawing on top, and then draw the exact same thing on the bottom, and then use your white pencil to pull it across like this, back and forth. Pull that color, and you can see that it makes this really cool sort of wavy, reflective sort of pattern. So I definitely recommend trying out this white Prismacolor colored pencil. This might actually work with some other colored pencil brands as well, but blending with white is definitely something fun to try if you've never done it. Now here's yet another tip, and this is going to be really similar to with the white pencil, but here what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be using the colorless blender. And basically it's pretty much, like I said, it's a lot similar to using the white. Here's the colorless blender here. It kind of has this sort of wood texture pattern, and you can see, you might be able to see this lead look kind of brownish, but it's a colorless blender. That's really just clear wax. And, you know, I think Prismacolor sells this separately. I've never actually seen this in a, like set, like in a box set of these. I actually bought this separately, so you might have to buy this separately if you can't find it in a box, which I don't know if they have that. But anyway, here are some things you can actually do with this. It's kind of similar, like I said, to the white pencil. You can take this sort of, you know, tornado effect here with the hard pressure and sort of lessen it. And you can take really hard pressure with your colorless blender and again sort of use this to blend. Now, I'll definitely admit that you're still going to get a lot of graininess because it's a really kind of hard sort of wax. It's not really quite as soft as the other pencils. It doesn't really blend it quite as well as the white does. As you know, it kind of is still pretty grainy. But it will sort of merge it together a little bit. So if you like that textured effect, but you want it to be a little bit less so, then this is definitely a good option. Another thing you can do that's kind of similar to blending is merging two colors together. Now this is essentially what I do when I blend, is I take one color on this side, one color on that side, and basically what I do is I sort of, like, I would take this purple and layer it over this blue. I would take the blue and layer it over that purple, and then mush them all together. I would take the colors and just use them over and over and over again until they're really blended together. But if you have the colorless blender, you can sort of just use it really hard pressure again, and you can just sort of pull it back and forth and merge these two colors together and really actually blend them, interestingly enough. You don't get really quite as strong of a color in the middle. But if that's what the kind of effect that you're going for, making this sort of light color in the middle, it's really good for that. Another thing that it does too, as I've noticed, is it will actually darken colors for some reason. I believe that it's because it's like pulling the color around. It's sort of moving it around from just its little, just from kind of sticking on top of the paper. It's kind of mushing it into the paper a little bit, and so it can actually darken colors. If you like that sort of textured sort of effect, and you don't mind that sort of graininess, it can be really cool to use it over some lightly pressured colored areas and make them just a little bit darker. You can also do the same thing with darker colored areas, although you won't really notice it nearly as much. But also if you have just like areas that are like kind of grainy a little bit and you just sort of want to blend it together, that can probably get rid of it just a little bit, as you can see like right in this area here on the blending, but just a little bit. So that's definitely something you can do with the colorless blender if you ever want to try that out too. Alright, and basically the last